LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the July 22nd edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out the weekend's 15 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. The political comedy source tonight will actually be the actual news. No Saturday Night Live, no Real Time with Bill Maher for a while, so I'm going to use an actually okay joke from Fox News Sunday guest host Bret Baier to start the show in just a minute. I will also have clips from the other Sunday morning news analysis shows, the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. But no NBC this week. Meet the Press was off for the British Golf Open. They're off for golf, tennis, soccer. If it's Sunday, it's not necessarily Meet the Press. Don't believe everything Chuck Todd tells you, I guess. And then the topic I'm covering, you can see in the title and down in the video description, 91% say Trump is Putin's puppet. And that is actually the poll that I ran on my special live stream I did Monday, just like right after the Putin-Trump summit in Helsinki. You can see here's the result, although after I posted the title of the show, I noticed there's one more vote for no, so now it's actually 90%. It's 77-8, not 77-7, but I'm sure that can change over time because the poll's still open. But if you watch that special live stream on Monday, I did that because I could not believe my eyes as to Trump performing so badly. I mean, one of the things I was thinking during last week's show when we were previewing the Helsinki summit is that, there are like four possibilities. He's like innocent and smart, in which case he will be really confrontational with Putin because he's outraged, and it's also politically good for him to be outraged with Putin to some degree, or at least call him on what he did. If he's innocent and stupid, he'd still be outraged, and so that would drive him even if he didn't do the politically smart thing. If he's guilty, if Trump is guilty and smart, he still would have acted more outraged because that would have been the politically smart thing to do even though he was guilty. The only thing that accounts for what he did last Monday in Helsinki is that Trump is guilty and stupid. Is that the only possibility left? Well, the way he acted is actually the topic of my poll this week. You can click right here in the corner, and the poll is now something, it's more subjective. It's what it looks like to you. It's does Trump act like someone who Putin has confidential information, or Trump acts like Putin has confidential information on him, true or false? So you can answer that poll this week. And I have a bunch of great clips, both on the inexplicable puppetry of Trump in the presence of Putin, and then the breaking news on Carter Page and the FISA warrant. I'll have some actual legal analysis at the end where I read through the warrant, and I'll show you why some of the things the Republicans say in the clips I'm going to show at the end, including Trey Gowdy, is just incredibly dishonest. But before I get to that, I want to get to the news summaries, and before I get to the news summaries, I promised you this actually pretty good joke from Bret Baier talking about Chris Wallace. This was right at the end of the Vladimir Putin interview that Chris Wallace did that they showed again on Fox News Sunday. I'll have a clip of that later, but this is him telling you to go to foxnewssunday.com if you want to see the whole interview, and here's the joke.
In America.
You can watch Chris's full interview with Vladimir Putin on foxnewssunday.com. We do know where Chris is, and he will be back next week. Up next, we'll bring in our Sunday group to discuss the...
So that's Bret Baier making a joke about, Chris Wallace just had this really confrontational interview with Vladimir Putin, but we still know where he is, and he will be back next week. That's what passes for political comedy, I guess, on the news analysis shows. And now we want to get to the actual news, and I have several news summaries that I'm going to compare and contrast. I want to start with CNN's State of the Union, which had the most on the breaking news about Carter Page, and you'll see some detail about the Carter Page FISA warrant. And the State of the Union was also still reeling from what happened in Helsinki last week, or not last week, last Monday. It seems like last year already, but Here's the Jake Tapper news summary right at the beginning of the show, including the most on the breaking news here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. What a week it was. I know we've said that a lot over the last couple of years, but this one may rank as the most head-spinning and consequential yet. The sighting of an American president standing side by side with a Russian dictator, echoing Vladimir Putin's talking points, may not have been a surprise to those who followed Trump's Twitter feed, but it was still shocking. Several days of walkbacks haven't clarified matters much. Nearly all of what Trump and Putin talked about in their 2 hours alone still a mystery. And in a week of surprises, even the man in charge of America's secrets was in the dark. Here's the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates.
The White House has announced on Twitter that Vladimir Putin is coming to the White House in the fall.
Say that again?
Vladimir Putin coming
Did I
to
hear
the...
you? Did I hear you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's going to be special.
That second proposed summit's supposed to happen right before the midterms, which leads to one big question on the table now. Will this week be a tipping point for the political standing of President Trump? Our brand new poll with the Washington Post offers some initial answers. Only 1 in 3 Americans approve of how Trump handled the summit with Putin. 4 in 10 said he went too far in supporting the Russian leader. 56% don't like that Trump questioned U.S. intelligence. That said, the president's GOP support did not collapse. 66% of Republicans back his handling of the Putin summit, and 51% support his questioning of U.S. intelligence. But the intensity of feeling all on the Democratic side, and by a 17-point margin, the American public believes America's leadership in the world has gotten weaker, not stronger, under Trump. Let's dig into all the...
So that obviously wasn't Jake Tapper on CNN. If you're doing the drinking game where you have to drink when I show the wrong clip, I guess it's time to drink, which I do more and more often during the Trump administration, I guess. But I actually picked that because the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary was probably the most extensive of any of them. And it also had those poll results, which are kind of an antidote for the title of my video, where I say 91% say Trump is Putin's puppet. That was just 91% of the people who watched my video on Monday, which is not, of course, a scientific poll. That's more scientific poll results. And I guess I already introduced the CNN State of the Union Jake Tapper clip, which, as I said before, I showed the last clip, actually has the most extensive coverage of the breaking news of the FISA warrant with Carter Page, because Carter Page was actually a guest on State of the Union. I'll have a clip from him a little bit later, but here is the CNN Jake Tapper State of the Union clip, where the State of the Union is still reeling from last week. George Stephanopoulos in that last clip said it could be one of those really consequential weeks, and I think that's actually true, even though sometimes it seems that's true every week, but there are certain weeks like the Muslim ban, Charlottesville, child separation, and this like cowering in front of Putin at the press conference that I think are really consequential weeks, and that is also why we're still reeling that's our State of the Union, and then the FISA warrant breaking news from Jake Tapper over here.
Washington, where the state of our union is still reeling from that Trump-Putin summit, from the president's attempts to deal with the backlash, and from new disclosures in multiple investigations. Just overnight, the Trump administration released a heavily redacted version of the previously top-secret application for surveillance of Trump campaign foreign policy advisor Carter Page. This is the first time that such a document has ever been made public, and it says, quote, the FBI believes that Page has been collaborating and conspiring with the Russian government, unquote, among many other charges. The warrant itself, of course, has been the subject of a very partisan fight on the House Intelligence Committee, and the president is already claiming victory on Twitter, saying that the released documents, quote, confirm with little doubt that the Department of, quote, Justice and FBI misled the courts, witch hunt, rigged, a scam. In fact, that tweet itself is misleading. The documents show that the FBI did use material from the Steele dossier, but the FBI disclosed that the person who hired Steele likely was looking for ways to discredit then-candidate Trump. It also noted that Steele had been a reliable source of information in the past. But let's talk to former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page, who joins me now. Let's get to the...
And like I said, I will have a clip from Carter Page later. I'm actually going to show you screenshots from the FISA warrant application documents that show why, like I said, Trey Gowdy and actually Lindsey Graham is also dishonest here. I should have taken screenshots last week. I should tell you this for my regular viewers. Last week, a couple times I talked about paragraph 44 in the Mueller indictment of the 12 Russian GRU military intelligence agents. Paragraph 44 was the Roger Stone paragraph. It was actually paragraph 22 that was the July 27th hacking in response to Trump saying, Russia, if you're listening. So that's a correction. I should have done that at the beginning of the show. Sorry about that. But I will show some actual screenshots from the FISA application or warrant application a little bit later after I get through the terrible Russia performance and reaction to that, which are in all these news summaries. The next one is actually the Fox News Sunday news summary. They didn't actually do a news summary at the beginning of the program like you saw in those last two clips. So I'm going to show their introduction, which I thought kind of downplayed how badly Trump did. And there's some things that they kind of left out, like the part where even when he was like cleaning it up, the wood and the wouldn't, when he was cleaning that up, he said, but it could have been Russia, it could have been there are a lot of people out there, and you don't really see that in this clip. But this is actually two Fox News Sunday clips edited together. First, the introduction with their news summary that I thought was spun kind of pro-Trump, but then to balance it out, they did sort of show how badly his position evolved over the week before their panel, and then their like senior political analyst Brit Hume said some really negative things about Trump over in the 3.5-minute clip that I've edited together for you over here.
In for Chris Wallace. President Trump invites Vladimir Putin to the White House for a round two after he walks back comments about Russian meddling in the 2016 election.
I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia. And I think that probably clarifies things pretty good by itself.
We'll discuss the fallout from the Helsinki summit, including the rift within the president's own party, with Congressman Trey Gowdy, chairman of the House Oversight Committee. Then,
we cannot wait to see whether Russia attacks us in the 2018 election. We know that they are in the midst of making that a reality.
Democrats seek details of what happened in Trump and Putin's one-on-one and call for tough new sanctions. We'll discuss with New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, the top Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee. And in case you missed it,
I have here the indictment that was presented on Friday from the special counsel Robert Mueller. May I give this to you to look at, sir?
Highlights from Chris's exclusive interview with the Russian leader, and insight and analysis from our Sunday panel. All right now on Fox News Sunday. And hello again from Fox News in Washington. The tension following President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin continues to rise this weekend as the president faces widespread criticism over his handling of Russia after he seemed to side with Putin's denials of election interference, at least at first.
Dan Coates came to me and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia.
Is Russia still make your way out? Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Press,
let's go. Make your way out. No, you don't believe that to be the case?
The president said thank you very much and was saying no to answering questions.
I let him know we can't have this. We're not going to have it. And that's the way it's going to be. Getting along with Russia is a positive, not a negative. Right. Now, with that being said, if that doesn't work out, I'll be the worst enemy he's ever had. The worst he's ever had.
The evolution this week of President Trump's position regarding Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election. It's time now for our Sunday group. Fox News senior political analyst Brit Hume. All right, Brit, the president's been very active on Twitter this morning, just a few moments ago, saying, I had a great meeting with Putin, and the fake news used every bit of their energy to try and disparage it. So bad for our country. Thoughts?
Well, what do we know about that meeting? Well, we know very little because there's no record of it of any kind that we know of except in the memories of the two participants and their translators. Unless Russia, of course, taped it. So we don't have any real way to assess that other than what Trump claimed about it. And, of course, his performance, as you just showed at the press conference with Putin in Helsinki, was, I think Newt Gingrich stated correctly, the worst moment of his presidency, and one that I think, despite his walking it back and repeatedly saying other things in its aftermath, I don't think he's going to live that down anytime soon.
So, yeah, he lost Fox News for about a day there, at least. A lot of people have reported on that. So that shows how badly he did. And you saw Brit Hume say that it's going to have some effect. Actually, a former Bush Republican consultant, Matthew Dowd, was over on ABC's This Week, and I heard him say that it's going to have a long-term effect because it actually undermines two things that Trump voters like about Trump. One, that he's like the strong alpha male, and he did not look like a strong alpha male at the Helsinki press conference, which, by the way, there's a link down in the video description to my coverage of the Helsinki press conference with all the pertinent clips from, and you get to save some time. And my commentary is pretty short because it's all fair use clips. So it's like 18 minutes of clips and like 7 minutes of commentary. Usually I try to make sure the clips and the commentary are about equal. Today you have 30 minutes of clips and probably end up about 30 minutes of commentary. So yeah, they lost Fox News. And although I thought that news summary there was a fairly sanitized version, it still didn't have some of the worst spots. Like I said, the way that Trump keeps coming back to it being a hoax. And I understand, just before I started broadcasting this show, Trump was back up tweeting that the whole thing is a witch hunt and a hoax. And actually, that's my one criticism of the Face the Nation news summary. This, again, is there was no Face the Nation news summary like the first two clips I showed you of news summaries. So this is sort of the introduction where Margaret Brennan summarizes the topics they're going to cover, like I just showed at the beginning of that Fox News Sunday clip. And one of the first things she says is that the Helsinki summit ended on a lighter moment. And they show Putin giving Trump a soccer ball, which was in that press conference, but that's not how it ended, which I will show to rebut what you see on Face the Nation in this next clip, which otherwise is a pretty good news summary, about a minute and a half over here.
Face the Nation. The showdown between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin ended with a lighthearted moment. But the fallout over the conflicting responses from the president over whether or not he believes Putin meddled in U.S. elections in 2016 or today led to a week of punishing headlines and widespread criticism, frustration, and outrage from even loyal supporters of the president.
There's been no president ever as tough as I have been on Russia.
But few other than the president believe that, and there are still more questions than answers about what was agreed to behind closed doors. There's also growing evidence about Russia's continued attempts to interfere in our elections. Two key Republican senators, South Carolina's Lindsey Graham and Florida's Marco Rubio, both criticized the president for his Helsinki performance. We'll see where they stand after a week of presidential backtracking. Former Secretary of State John Kerry will tell us about the Obama administration's efforts to challenge Putin on meddling. Plus, a look at a fresh face in the Democratic Party, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who pulled off a stunning upset against a top House Democrat in her primary last month. She's joined by a familiar face, Vermont's Bernie Sanders, as they campaign for Democrats in unusual territory. We'll talk to both of them. We'll have plenty of analysis on all the political news this week, just ahead on Face the Nation.
So yeah, that's all the topics that were covered on Face the Nation. If you want to see all of those topics, including the interview with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, that whole thing is available down at the link to Face the Nation, which is actually the Face the Nation YouTube channel. Down in the video description. I'm going to show a clip of Bernie Sanders in a minute. By the way, I think I said that I got to minimize my commentary on my Monday live stream because all of the clips I took were fair use clips, but I meant to say public domain. Did I say fair use? I meant public domain because they were straight from the White House website, so they were public domain, not fair use clips. But anyway, that's another mistake, but whatever. If I drink, I'll start making more mistakes. So you can drink if you want to, but I did promise that I was going to rebut what Margaret Brennan said at the beginning of that CBS Face the Nation clip, where she said that the Helsinki summit press conference ended on a lighter note, and they showed Putin giving Trump a soccer ball, but actually it ended up on this whole like tirade of Trump going off about Peter Strzok and the witch hunt, as you can see from the final like 24 seconds of the press conference over here.
And if anybody watched Peter Strzok testify over the last couple of days, and I was in Brussels watching it, it was a disgrace to the FBI, it was a disgrace to our country, and you would say that was a total witch hunt. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
So you can see that was the actual ending of the press conference, not the soccer ball. And you notice I only had that clip shrunk down to about 90% size instead of the 75% size I do for most of the clips, because it's not a fair use clip. It's a public domain clip from the White House website. And the thing about all the news analysis is the Republicans have started coming back trying to justify Trump's really bad performance at the Helsinki summit press conference. And one of the things they're trying to, they have this straw man argument. I've heard Trump say this, and Janine Pirro said, like, you know, what do you want him to do? Shoot Putin? Or what do you want me to do? Go over there and, like, shout at him in his face? And, you know, no, you want to, like, confront him with what he did and, you know, stay at your podium, but, like, make a firm statement, like, confront him with the indictment. And one of the things that Senator Robert Menendez, who was on Fox News Sunday, I didn't take his clip, but he said, you know, what Trump should have done is what Chris Wallace did in his subsequent interview of Vladimir Putin. And Chris Wallace is fine. Remember, that was the first clip. He's fine, even though he confronted Vladimir Putin. And as promised, I'm going to show you, this is actually a little under 5 minutes of Chris Wallace kind of showing at least the facts that Donald Trump could have brought up. Of course, Vladimir Putin has this whole, like, denial where he says, oh, by the way, if you want to look at my clip list notes, that's down in the video description. I think I forgot to say you can look at the 15 clips and 4 still images I'm using, and you'll see that first, when the thing that is kind of most creepy about this is when Chris Wallace starts talking about the specific units of the GRU that were mentioned in the indictment. You'll get like this evil laugh from Vladimir Putin. I don't know, is it an evil laugh, or is it kind of like the Rudy Giuliani laugh where he has these inappropriate laughs that try to make it look like, oh yes, I don't care, it's not a serious thing, I'm laughing, ha ha ha. That's like the Rudy Giuliani attorney strategy where, you know, you try to make it look like nothing serious going on here, or I wouldn't be laughing. I don't know if that, you can let me know what you think. And then first he says, you know, Russia didn't interfere, couldn't have interfered, and then, you know, everything that was leaked was truthful. It wasn't, there was nothing dishonest about the stuff that was the hacked emails from the DNC and John Podesta. It was all truthful information, so that's not really interference. And you'll see near the end of this clip, Chris Wallace calls him on that, and I think he even says, you know, if you steal counterfeit money, it's not real money, but you still stole it. And I think it's a really good example of how Trump could have been more confrontational on the facts. And let's watch that 4-minute, 49-second clip together over here.
Mr. President, one of the issues that is standing in the way of more progress, as you know, are the allegations of Russian interference in the U.S. election. You have repeatedly said, and you said again today, that this was not the action of the Russian state, that if it was anything, it was patriotic Russian individuals. I have here the indictment that was presented on Friday from the special counsel Robert Mueller that says that 12 members of Russian military intelligence, the GRU, and they talk specifically about units 26-165 and 74-455. They say, you smile, let me finish. They say that these units were specifically involved in hacking into Democratic Party computers, stealing information, and spreading it to the world to try to disrupt the American election. May I give this to you to look at, sir? Here?
Да, положите, пожалуйста. Да. Значит, позвольте мне, отвечая на ваш вопрос, начать
start answering your question
с другого.
With something a little bit different.
Смотрите, все говорят о
Let's have a look at it this way.
вмешательстве России.
People are talking about the purported interference of Russia with the election process in the United States. I've mentioned this in 2016 and I want to say it now again. And I really wish for your American listeners to listen to what I say. First of all, Russia, as a state, has never interfered with the internal affairs of the United States, let alone its elections.
But sir, this is the indictment. It shows I have 12 names here. It talks about specific units of the GRU, Russian military intelligence. Is the GRU not part of the Russian state?
Я сейчас вам отвечу.
I'll get to it. Just have a little bit of patience and you'll get a full answer to your question.
Вмешательство во внутренние дела.
Interference with the domestic affairs of the United States. Do you really believe
что с территории Российской Федерации
that
можно было повлиять на выборы?
Someone acting from the Russian territory could have influenced the United States and influenced the choice of millions of Americans?
I'm not
This is
asking whether
utterly
they
ridiculous.
influenced. I'm asking whether they tried.
Я сейчас отвечу.
I'm about to answer.
Сейчас отвечу. Вот это, во-первых, все-таки.
Well, this was the first point that I'm trying to make. If you'll have some patience, you'll hear the entire response.
Вот я говорил в 2016 году, хочу повторить сейчас.
I said this in 2016 and I say it now. The idea was about hacking an email account of a Democratic candidate.
Была какая-то подтасовка фактов.
Was it some rigging of facts? Was it some forgery of facts? That's the important thing that I'm trying to, the important point that I'm trying to make. Was this any false information planted? No, it wasn't. These hackers that are being discussed, and I'll get back to it. Just bear with me for a moment. As we're getting told, they hacked a certain email account and there was an information about manipulations conducted within the Democratic Party to incline the process in favor of one candidate. And as far as I know, the entire party leadership resigned. They admitted the fact of their manipulations. So that's one thing, that manipulations with the public opinion should stop and an apology should be made to the public at large, instead of looking for the responsible, for the party at fault. And now to the mentioned things. As I said in the press conference.
But Mr. President, may I just say, you're indicating
Don't you like
that
my
they
answer?
stole real money, not counterfeit money. So are you saying it's okay because of the facts that they took from the DNC, from John Podesta, it was their real emails, so it's okay to hack and spread this information out and interfere with the election?
Послушайте меня.
Well, listen to me, please. The information that I am aware of, there's nothing false about it. Every single grain of it is true, and the Democratic leadership admitted it, the first point. Now, the second point. If you don't like my answer, you can give it to me straight away, and I just keep silence. And if you want Americans to listen to my opinion, could you please wait for a little bit? And now for the specific accusations.
I love the way that it was the way the Putin saying, "Hey, stop interrupting me," gets like goes through the translator there. If you want Americans to hear what I think, then you can be quiet for a little bit. Otherwise, you heard the translation there. But I think I pretty much explained what I thought of Putin's answer, and I especially explained before I showed that clip how the way Chris Wallace confronted him is kind of a model for what Trump could have done. So what does it mean that Trump was so, obsequious and subservient to Putin, both in the visual sense and the rhetorical sense, whether he said would or wouldn't, it doesn't make up for all the things I talked about in the 25-minute video I made on Monday when I was pretty much flabbergasted after the Helsinki summit press conference, which again, you can watch that 25-minute video if you didn't at a link in the video description. I actually am pretty proud of how that turned out, so you can check that out if you want. But the reason why Trump acted that way, well, this is, like I said, that poll that I'm taking in this video about whether it's true or false that Trump is acting like Putin has compromising information on him. And that is basically what Representative Adam Schiff asserts in this clip from, this is CNN's this is ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. George Stephanopoulos is actually specifically asked him straight out, is Trump compromised? Does Putin have compromising information on Trump? And this is not that long a clip, but I think this is a key thing to think about, and the way that he might be compromised, Adam Schiff talks about over here.
They're not willing to follow through.
Congressman Schiff, you've had some tough words for the president this week, calling him the gravest threat to democracy. Other Democrats have followed that up as well. Just bluntly, do you believe he's compromised by Vladimir Putin?
Well, I certainly think he's acting like someone who's compromised, and it may very well be that he is compromised, or it may very well be that he believes that he's compromised, that the Russians have information on him. We were not permitted to look into one of the allegations that was most serious to me, and that is, were the Russians laundering money through the Trump Organization? The Republicans wouldn't allow us to go near that. I hope that Bob Mueller's investigating it, because, again, if that's the leverage the Russians are using, it would not only explain the president's behavior, but it would help protect the country by knowing that, in fact, our president was compromised.
Tom Boss, we've heard that also from Chuck Schumer.
And that's actually a two-person interview with Tom Bossert, who used to be the White House Homeland Security Advisor, and he quit, and now he's an ABC News analyst. And, as you know, I normally try not to take the pundits, even though he used to be a newsmaker. But that Adam Schiff commentary about money laundering, there's a whole bunch of information about how Trump was had defaulted on a bunch of loans and couldn't get any loans from American banks, and then all of a sudden had all this money. Where did all this money come from? I mean, that could be the compromising information. It doesn't have to be the so-called P tape. It could be some sort of financial shenanigans, and the thing is that it doesn't even have to be really explicit, and that's one of the things Adam Schiff said there, and that's discussed in much greater detail in this New Yorker article. I put a link to it down in the video description. It's from July 19th by Adam Davidson, titled A Theory of Trump Compromat, which is the Russian word for compromising material. Why the president is so nice to Putin, even when Putin might not want him to be. That's the title. And because that's one of the weird things, it's that's what I was saying about guilty and stupid at the beginning, that even Putin, and if you watch how Russian media played this, they were they didn't really gloat that much, because Trump almost went too far. He's trying so hard not to say anything negative about Vladimir Putin, which, anyway, so you can check out that New Yorker article if you want a theory on the Trump compromat. And the next clip I want to show is another indicator that Donald Trump's performance at the Helsinki summit press conference must have been really, really bad. This is the CBS Face the Nation clip I promised with Senator Bernie Sanders, where you'll see Margaret Brennan asks sort of a setup question to Bernie Sanders, should Trump withdraw the invitation to the White House to Vladimir Putin? And he doesn't really answer that, but then he basically attacks Trump from the right, from the conservative side. So, if you are the president of the United States and you are getting attacked on Russia from the right by a socialist, I think you have really, really messed up. That is my analysis, that you can tell me what you think about as we watch that 75-second clip from CBS's Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan, Senator Bernie Sanders over here.
Was invited to the White House this fall. Do you think it should be withdrawn?
Look, the truth is, it's hard to comment on anything that Trump says because he could change his mind tomorrow. But I will tell you that I was absolutely outraged by his behavior in Helsinki, where he really sold the American people out. And it makes me think that either Trump doesn't understand what Russia has done not only to our elections, but to cyber attacks against all parts of our infrastructure. Either he doesn't understand it, or perhaps he is being blackmailed by Russia because they may have compromising information about him. Or perhaps also you have a president who really does have strong authoritarian tendencies, and maybe he admires the kind of government that Putin is running in Russia. And I think all of that is a disgrace and a disservice to the American people, and we have got to make sure that Russia does not interfere, not only in our elections, but in other aspects of our lives.
Well, picking up on
So I can't disagree with anything Senator Bernie Sanders said there, and like I said before I showed the clip, it shows how much difficulty President Trump is in, that he's being attacked from the right on Russia by a Democratic socialist, Bernie Sanders. That was actually also part of a two-person interview that Margaret Brennan did. The other person interviewed was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the progressive who won in that against one of the top Democrats in the House of Representatives in New York in a primary, and that's worth watching. If although she said one thing that, well, anyway, I didn't take any clips from that because it didn't fit with my topic, but like I said, all of Face the Nation's available at a link down in the video description. The next clip, or the next two clips I want to show, are two contrasting Republicans responding to Donald Trump's terrible performance at the Helsinki summit. One is Representative Trey Gowdy, and I talked about how dishonest he is, but that's in response to the FISA warrant issue, and with Carter Page, and that is coming up after these two clips. I'm going to start covering the whole Carter Page thing, including the clip of Carter Page being interviewed by Jake Tapper. But actually in this clip, Trey Gowdy is still pretty critical of President Trump and his performance at the Helsinki summit, unlike Marco Rubio in the subsequent clip, where I think it's kind of like Fox News, where they were upset for one day, but once he said, "Oh, I meant wouldn't, not would," they came around and were his big defender again. And so I'm critical of Marco Rubio, but that's the clip, not this clip, but the next clip. Here is Trey Gowdy actually being fairly critical of President Trump. So give him credit for that, even though I'm going to really criticize him in the clip I show after the Marco Rubio clip on Carter Page. But I'll talk about that later. I'll talk about this clip after we watch together here.
After the president's meeting with Vladimir Putin in that much-analyzed press conference in Helsinki, your colleague, Republican colleague from Texas, Congressman Will Hurd, a former CIA officer, wrote an op-ed for the New York Times, and it was entitled, "Trump is being manipulated by Putin. What should we do?" And in it, the Texas Republican writes, quote, "Over the course of my career as an undercover officer in the CIA, I saw Russian intelligence manipulate many people. I never thought I would see the day when an American president would be one of them." So do you agree with Congressman Hurd? Is the president being manipulated by Vladimir Putin?
Well, Will has a background as a CIA officer. I defer to him on manipulation. I can tell you this, Bret, the president has access to every bit of evidence, even more than those of us on House Intel, and Will and I serve on Intel. He has access to Pompeo and Chris Wray and Dan Coates and Nikki Haley. The evidence is overwhelming. It can be proven beyond any evidentiary burden that Russia is not our friend and they tried to attack us in 2016. So the president either needs to rely on the people that he has chosen to advise him, or those advisors need to reevaluate whether or not they can serve in this administration. But the disconnect cannot continue. The evidence is overwhelming, and the president needs to say that and act like it.
So he eventually said it through the week, Congressman, but what do you think was the evolution there? Why the hesitation?
I don't know. I watched the press conference. It wasn't just that line. It was the president missed, I think, a really good opportunity to distinguish the United States from any other country, but especially from Russia. And I don't know what was said in the private conversation, but I do know this. We got a classified briefing this week, Bret. There is no way you can listen to the evidence and not conclude not that the Democrats were the victims, but the United States of America were the victim. We were the victims of what Russia did in 2016, and it ought to be a source of unity and rallying around the fact that we're never going to allow this to happen again, and we're going to punish those who tried to do it. And there was this equivocation during the press conference that I'm glad he corrected it. But when you're the leader of the free world, every syllable matters, and you really shouldn't be having to correct it when you're the leader of the free world.
Well, as you mentioned, after several days of kind of dealing with the rhetorical walkback, the White House announced on Twitter that senior staff had been tapped to set up a second summit.
Oh, yeah. Then you can see that Baier goes on to ask him about the upcoming Putin summit sometime in the fall, maybe before the election, maybe after the election. But like I said before I showed the clip, I kind of have to give Trey Gowdy some credit there for being critical of Trump even after his walk back, wouldn't versus would and all the other stuff, that he's, being equivocal, not really standing up for the United States. So good for Trey Gowdy there, especially considering that I'm going to criticize him pretty heavily when it comes to Carter Page in just a minute. But before I get to those clips, I want to contrast that Trey Gowdy clip with the Marco Rubio clip, which I think is actually more representative of what I heard from Republicans. A lot of Republicans were critical of Donald Trump right after the Helsinki summit, but, when he came back 27 hours later and said, oh, I meant wouldn't instead of would, which was so ridiculous because, of course, that was not, like I said, if you go watch my coverage of the Monday press conference from Helsinki, changing would to wouldn't does not fix all of the problems that I discussed and that were pretty evident if you watch the clips I showed. That is just like, it's a little Band-Aid on like the, worst, machete attack that you've ever seen, or I don't know, whatever. I'm trying to come up with a metaphor on the spur of the moment. Sorry about that. But it was really bad, and yet the walk back on Tuesday, 27 hours later, seemed to bring a lot of Republicans back, including apparently Marco Rubio, who doesn't really want to criticize the president much after the walk back, as you can see in this interview response he had to Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union this morning here.
Joke. I want to play the moment where President Trump appeared to side with Putin over the U.S. intelligence community in Helsinki. Take a listen.
People came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
Now, 27 hours later, after 2 television interviews where he didn't say anything, plus 5 tweets where he didn't say anything, then President Trump, after being told by Pompeo and Pence he needed to clean this up, claimed that he meant to say, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia. Do you believe that?
I don't know what to believe about it. I know he said it after, I know what he said, and I don't think it was a good moment for this administration, and I disagree with it. I know he came back the next day and said something to clean that up, and I'm glad that he did it. I'm glad that he cleaned that up, because it left, if you watch that video, it leaves the impression that my intelligence community says one thing, Putin says another. I'm siding with Putin. And that was a bad impression to leave behind.
Even when he cleaned it up, he said it was the Russians, although it could have been a lot of people out there, which is still undermining the idea.
Yeah, look, I don't like the way this was handled throughout the week. I wish it would have gone differently. My job in the U.S. Senate is to push for policies that ensure that no matter what is being said, what actually happens is good for America. And it's not good for America to have any country interfering in our elections, but especially Vladimir Putin, who believes that weakening us is what's going to make him stronger, allowing him, no matter you're a Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. We are America. We should be a little bit territorial about our elections and about our politics. And the idea that another country gets to come in here and pit us against each other, especially Vladimir Putin, is something we should all be against, especially moving forward.
There's nothing that Putin would like.
So that was pretty wimpy, pretty weak from Senator Marco Rubio, but he has shown himself to be a fairly wimpy, weak guy. I remember when he said he wasn't going to run for the Senate when he ran for president, and somehow he did run for the Senate, and he's in the Senate. So just the fact that he's in the Senate proves to me he's kind of wimpy to begin with. And like I said, I actually like Trey Gowdy's answer better than Marco Rubio's, even though these next several clips are going to include one in which I really criticize Trey Gowdy, and that's because I've gotten to the Carter Page section, and this has to do with the information that was released about this FISA warrant. FISA is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and I have to start off by saying that I have never been a big fan of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, especially after the FISA Act's amendments that were passed in 2008 that President Obama voted for when he was a senator running for president, and they basically gave legal authority to the illegal warrantless wiretaps from the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration. Some of that is actually over here in the No Place to Hide book from Glenn Greenwald. I highly recommend that book. It talks all about the warrantless wiretapping and all sorts of other NSA surveillance and Edward Snowden, and I'm not going to get into all of that. But before I started talking about the FISA warrant, I wanted to say that I think that I don't think that the whole current FISA structure gives enough protections to your Fourth Amendment rights. If you want to look at your Fourth Amendment, you can see it in your Constitution. I always, of course, have my ACLU Constitution handy that I also give out to my Patreon patrons who pledge $10 a month or more. As you can see down in the video description, you can become a Patreon patron. At $5 level, you get these stickers, which also go to the $10 level. But just because I mentioned the Constitution, I thought I would mention that, because I always, of course, have my handy pocket Constitution here. And I think FISA has real Fourth Amendment problems. But the particular FISA warrant that was released over the weekend, the problems that the Republicans, who of course voted reauthorized FISA, both the Democrats and the Republicans, except for very few, they all voted to reauthorize the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. So why it is, and for the ones who think Trump is such a danger to the nation, why they gave him Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Authority, I don't know. But this particular warrant is not being... Remember, back in February, Devin Nunes, the House Intelligence Committee chair, said that there was all this wrongdoing in the Devin Nunes memo. Well, that was pretty much disproved by what was released in these documents over the weekend. But before I get to what's in the documents, I want to show Carter Page basically lying to Jake Tapper about whether or not he was a Russian agent, and he has this weird smile the whole time. Yeah, I mean, he looks so guilty because of this weird smile. You can tell me what you think after you watch that first clip on the Carter Page FISA warrant disclosure over the weekend that I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together over here.
To the crux of it, Carter, the FISA application says, quote, the FBI believes that Carter Page has been collaborating and conspiring with the Russian government. There is probable cause that such activities involve or are about to involve violations of the criminal statutes of the United States. The document accuses you of being a, quote, agent of a foreign power. Were you?
Jake, this is so ridiculous. It's just beyond words. You know, it's you're talking about misleading the courts. It's just so misleading going through those 400-plus page documents. You know, where do you even begin? It's literally a complete joke, and it only continues. It's just really sad.
Well, were you ever an agent of a foreign power? Did you ever advise the Kremlin or work with the Kremlin on anything?
Look, Jake, no, I've never been an agent of the foreign power by any stretch of the imagination. You know, I may have, back in the G20 when they were getting ready to do that in St. Petersburg, I might have participated in a few meetings that a lot of people, including people from the Obama administration were sitting on in Geneva, Paris, et cetera. But I've never been anywhere near what's being described herein.
But you have advised the Kremlin in the past. That was 2013, that G20 meeting, I believe.
Look, there were experts from around the world talking about energy issues, and I was one of countless myself and a lot of academics and business people who were involved in these various discussion sessions, but it was nothing.
But you did advise the Kremlin. I mean, I just want to make it clear. You did advise the Kremlin back in 2013 or 2012, somewhere in there.
Jake, it's really spin. I mean, I sat in on some meetings, but to call me an advisor, I think is way over the top.
Except in a 2013 letter you wrote it says, quote, over the past half year, I have had the privilege to serve as an informal advisor to the staff of the Kremlin in preparation for the presidency of the G20 summit next month, where energy issues will be a prominent point on the agenda. That's August 2013. That's yourself calling yourself an informal advisor to the Kremlin.
Informal, having some conversations with people. I mean, this is really nothing and just an attempt to distract from the real crimes that are shown in this misleading document. Page 8, it says, it talks about disguised propaganda, including the planting of false or misleading articles, which is exactly what this is. So that's kind of the pot calling the kettle black by Mr. Comey and co.
One of the things that's interesting is the document.
The pot calling the kettle black by Mr. Comey and co. and company. I assume that's an abbreviation. I don't really believe anything I heard Carter Page say there, but not that I have overwhelming evidence one way or the other, because all of it is still pending and classified. But he seems kind of smarmy. He has that weird smile, that I used to be a jury trial lawyer, a criminal defense attorney, and they used to tell the jury that you can decide the credibility of the witness by his demeanor. It's not as good on video as like watching someone in person, of course, but his demeanor seems kind of sketchy to me. That's not necessarily dispositive, but you can tell me what you think about Carter Page's credibility down in the comments section. And now I have that clip of Trey Gowdy that I promised you earlier, where he is being incredibly dishonest, because you have to remember, and I covered this way back in February when the Devin Nunes House Intelligence Committee memo came out that said this whole FISA warrant was so biased because they didn't tell the court, they didn't tell the FISA court that they relied on this Steele dossier, and that the Steele dossier that they relied on was politically motivated, that it was opposition research, and that turns out to be totally not true. I will show you that in screenshots from the documents that were released over the weekend, and Trey Gowdy does not address that at all, and Baier doesn't even ask him about it. That's what I'm most critical of, is the way Baier does not say, because Trey Gowdy was one of the only Republicans who actually read all this material without any of the redactions. Devin Nunes, who wrote the Devin Nunes memo, he never read the original primary material. He relied on Trey Gowdy's reading of it and his summary. So if anyone's to blame for the dishonesty in the Devin Nunes memo, it's Trey Gowdy. And not only does Baier not ask him about it, but he lets him get away with basically saying the same thing, that, they didn't say that the Steele dossier was funded by Hillary Clinton and the DNC. They used more vague terms, and if you look at the footnote, it would have been easier just to say the names, and that's also really dishonest for reasons I will explain after I show you this 2-minute 47-second clip from Fox News Sunday, where Baier, the guest host, does a bad job of questioning, and Trey Gowdy, the guest, does a dishonest job of answering, as I will explain more after we watch it together over here.
I want to turn to the investigation. Overnight, responding to Freedom of Information requests, the Department of Justice released a heavily redacted FISA court request by the FBI asking for permission to surveil or listen into Carter Page. fairly low-level figure in the Trump campaign orbit, but one the FBI suspected, according to these documents, of colluding with Russian agents and maybe being one. I know you read this months ago, but it's the first time one of these kind of documents is out in the public domain, even heavily redacted. What is your take on this?
My take is that Carter Page is more like Inspector Gadget than he is Jason Bourne or James Bond. Trump never met him. Trump never had a conversation with him. I'm sure he's been on the FBI's radar for a long time, well before 2016. Here's what we'll never know, Bret. We'll never know whether or not the FBI had enough without the dossier, the unvetted DNC-funded dossier, because they included it. And everyone who reads this FISA application sees the amount of reliance they placed on this product funded by Hillary Clinton's campaign and the DNC. So that's point number one, is the dossier and its use. The other thing I hope my fellow citizens will take note of is the FBI missed a really good opportunity to tell the judge exactly who paid for that. If you look at the footnote, it takes a lot more effort to define it the way they did, where you have no idea who funded it, than just to come right out and say the DNC hired Perkins Coie, who hired Fusion GPS, who hired Christopher Steele. There, done. That's an easy footnote. Everybody can follow it. But for whatever reason, the FBI decided not to represent that to a court.
So Carter Page is never indicted. He hasn't been brought in. He's still walking around.
Yeah, and that, I mean, look, this is an investigation. All investigations don't lead to indictments. There have been 24 indictments in this case, but Carter Page is not one of them. I have a different standard between investigating something and someone. And keep in mind, counterintelligence investigations are never designed to become public. So you and I were not supposed to be having a conversation about Carter Page on national television. This case is different. He has not been indicted. He's presumed innocent. He'll be presumed innocent even if he is indicted. I don't have an issue with looking into people that have cozy relationships with Russia. That's fine. That's what law enforcement's supposed to do. I do have an issue when you rely on political opposition research that is unvetted and you represent that to a court and use it to spy on an American.
You have seen this document long ago, but are there documents?
Yeah, he did see it long ago, and that's the only real reference other than the previous reference in that clip where Bret Baier said, you read this months ago. Bret Baier never said, and you were responsible for the Devin Nunes memo. That never came up in the interview, which was totally a case of Fox News bias. But as I promised, I'm going to show you a few screenshots. First of all, that whole thing where they said, well, they didn't really tell the FISA court that the Steele dossier was opposition research. Well, first of all, here is the first footnote. It's like a whole page long, and it's probably hard to read, of the... this is from from October 2016, the first FISA application, or FISA warrant application that's in the release material. And by the way, you can see the entire 400 pages yourself at a link down in the video description. And you can see they totally explain the source of the material. And all this information is also a little more condensed in the January 2017 version that I think you can read here. Not only do they condense the same stuff in the second paragraph, but in the first paragraph, they update it so that it says, in or about October 2016, the FBI suspended its relationship with Source One. They don't mention Steele by name, but they update the court and let the court know that the relationship has been suspended. And then the second paragraph is pretty much what was in that last screenshot. It says that Source One was approached by an identified U.S. person, indicated to Source One that a U.S.-based law firm had been hired, the identified U.S. person, to conduct research regarding candidate number one's ties to Russia. And then look at the end. The FBI speculates that the identified U.S. person was likely looking for information that could be used to discredit candidate number one's campaign. So it's pretty clear that it was opposition research. And candidate number one, of course, is Donald Trump. And that's actually the most disingenuous thing about what Trey Gowdy said, is where he said they could have easily just said it was Steele and used his name. Why do they have to go out of their way to use, like source number one, just to make it more difficult to understand? They should have been more simple. But the whole thing is the FISA court and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Operation is supposed to minimize U.S. persons and not use their names. And in fact, they go to such lengths to do that. I wanted to show you this other paragraph from that same January 2017 FISA warrant renewal application. This is how they describe candidate one in a footnote on page 5 there. On or about November 8th, 2016, candidate number one was elected president. Although candidate number one is now president-elect, in order to maintain the historical accuracy of the background information, unless otherwise stated, the original references to candidate number one and members of candidate number one's campaign team will remain the same. So they're saying candidate number one was elected president on or about November 8th, 2016. But they're still not saying Donald Trump because they don't want to use the name of a U.S. person in a FISA application. So that is another reason why Trey Gowdy was being totally dishonest, because that's just the way they do it in FISA applications. They go out of their way not to name U.S. persons, even when it's totally obvious when they're saying candidate one was elected president on or about November 8th, 2016. I think we all know who candidate one is, but they still don't name it because that's just like the practice in FISA applications. So that was totally bogus spin from Trey Gowdy and totally dishonest, as I promised you earlier in the video. And you can actually see some of that same dishonesty from Lindsey Graham when he answers a question. This is another CBS Face the Nation clip talking to Margaret Brennan. And you'll see that he also says that the same thing, that, we'll never know, or that it was that they misrepresented to the court. And I just showed you why Lindsey Graham is also being dishonest in this next penultimate news clip. Before I do have a bonus Sandy Dash clip at the end, but this is the penultimate news clip before Adam Schiff reacts to all of this as the final news clip. But here's Lindsey Graham being almost as dishonest as Trey Gowdy in that last clip over here.
The president is again accusing the Justice Department and the FBI of misleading courts and illegally surveilling his campaign. He's pointing to these documents that were just released about Carter Page, who was a campaign associate and has admitted to having advised the Kremlin at one point. You sit on Senate Judiciary. Is the president wrong?
No, I think the whole FISA warrant process needs to be looked at. The warrant on Carter Page was supported mostly by a dossier that came from Michael Steele, who was being paid by the Democratic Party to do opposition research. And the dossier was collected, I think, from Russian intelligence services. And if you ask the FBI today, how much of the dossier on Trump has been verified? Almost none of it.
But you say mostly, not entirely. Therefore, was the surveillance justified?
No, not at all, in my view. If the dossier is the reason you issued the warrant, it was a bunch of garbage. The dossier is proven to be a bunch of garbage.
So the president is correct?
In my view, that the FISA warrant process needs to be looked at closely by Congress. The main reason they issued the warrant was the dossier prepared by Mr. Steele. They never told the court that he was a paid operative of the Democratic Party. The substance of the dossier to this day is a bunch of garbage.
I'm pressing you on this because you have expressed some concern about the president's skepticism about his own intelligence community and this specific criticism of the FBI and
different
Justice
than
Department.
whether or not the Russians interfered in our election. They did. The Carter Page warrant is whether or not the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians. I haven't seen any evidence of it, but I think...
Of course, there's a lot of evidence of collusion. I don't know if it's dispositive, if it proves stuff beyond a reasonable doubt for a criminal court, which isn't really the standard. It's more like, does it prove it enough to bring down Trump's poll numbers amongst Republicans enough that he loses 13 or 14 Republican senators after the 2018 election and gets removed in the Senate after being impeached in the House. And well, I've talked about that many times before, but I don't want to go off on that tangent. But I think Lindsey Graham was definitely dishonest when he said that they never told the court that Michael Steele was a paid opposition research political operative or whatever. I think I showed you pretty clearly in the January 2017 screenshot that you can see, and then this one from October 2016 that's harder to read, but there's a link down in the video description to the whole thing. And so Lindsey Graham was definitely being dishonest, just like Trey Gowdy. And in terms of whether the Michael Steele dossier was garbage, that really hasn't been proven, but that is mostly classified and will be coming out later, I think. But as to whether it was mainly what they relied on for this warrant against Carter Page, that's not true. Just you can read for yourself by reading it. There's all sorts of other shady things that Carter Page did, going back to that 2013 letter that he wrote himself saying he was an informal advisor to the Kremlin that Jake Tapper asked him about. And Adam Schiff, I think, also does a good job of explaining what was shady about Carter Page other than in the Michael Steele dossier. Although I don't think even in this clip he does a good enough job explaining how Devin Nunes was a big fat liar way back in February, which he should have done, but nobody really did on the Sunday shows this morning. But that's the last news clip before the bonus Sandy Dash clip over here.
Summit. We also have some breaking news overnight. The release of those 400 pages of documents related to the surveillance of Carter Page, who has served as a foreign policy advisor on the Trump campaign. Here's how the New York Times reports it. It says, visible portions showed that the FBI in stark terms had told the intelligence court that Mr. Page had, quote, established relationships with Russian government officials, including Russian intelligence officers, that the Bureau believed the Russian government's efforts are being coordinated with Page and perhaps other individuals associated with Mr. Trump's campaign, and that Mr. Page has been collaborating and conspiring with the Russian government. The president up already with a reaction, Congressman Schiff. He says this confirms with little doubt that the Department of Justice and FBI misled the courts. And then in a second tweet, he says it looks more and more like the Trump campaign was illegally being spied on for the political gain of crooked Hillary Clinton and the DNC. Congressman Schiff, is that how you read the 400 pages?
No, of course not. And I think actually if the performance that we had in Helsinki took place before those applications were filed, I think that whole interchange with Putin would have been a central exhibit in the FISA applications. No, those applications set out in some detail, a lot of which unfortunately is redacted, just why the FBI was so concerned that Carter Page might be acting as an agent of a foreign power. And let's remember, that application and those renewals have been vindicated in substantial part by Carter Page's own words in a letter I think you asked him about, in which Carter Page acknowledged being an informal advisor to the Kremlin. But the information they had when that application was filed included the fact the Russians were dumping these documents, that the Russians had previewed the dumping of these documents with George Papadopoulos, that Carter Page had in fact been a target of Russian intelligence in the past, that Carter Page had gone to Russia during the campaign, that he had meetings with the Russian officials that Page had publicly denied, but we can now confirm that he did in fact have meetings with Russian officials. So it was a solid application and renewals signed by 4 different judges appointed by 3 different Republican presidents.
Mr. Busser, do you see any evidence?
So there, I think Adam Schiff did a good job of pointing out that there was information in those 400 pages of FISA warrant application and renewal application that Carter Page was doing all sorts of shady stuff, and you can read it for yourself at a link I put in the video description. That's the last news clip. I do appreciate all of you who've watched my live show, especially the super chat contributions I saw. Well, I don't know if you should give me a super chat contribution for drinking. That might even be illegal. I don't know. But I saw there were some kitten emojis on that last one. And I did promise both a Sandy the dog and Dash the cat clip at the end. I briefly was able to track down Dash the cat. I could not get him to stand in the doorway, although Sandy the dog is she's lying down right there next to the American Constitutional Law book, as you'll see in this 33-second final non-news clip here for the show. Thank you all, and I will say one final goodbye after this clip here that we'll watch together now. So there you have it, Sandy and Dash, even a Sandy close-up. I hope you enjoyed that clip. The other clips I picked out for you all. As usual, I spent all day Sunday watching the Sunday news morning, the Sunday news analysis shows from Sunday morning, and picking out the best clips, giving you my analysis. I appreciate those of you who contribute through the Super Chat, those of you who are my Patreon supporters, those patrons, if you want to become one of those, there's a link down in the video description. Also, you can give me a one-time contribution through PayPal Me, which there's a link for that. I also appreciate just the supportive comments. I appreciate the thumbs up, sharing it on social media, and I do plan on continuing this and maybe even adding in some more of those random live events when news events happen, like I did on Monday. If you like me doing that, if you like me doing this, find some way to tell me through the comments, the thumbs up, through financial support, and I guess until I find some other reason to make a video this week, or until next Sunday when I do my Sunday live clip roundup, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.